Thank you, Kevin and Amy, for having me here again. I breezed through the participant list a little bit already, so I do see some familiar names. So for those of you that I've met, nice to see your name again. Hopefully you're having a good snow day. And for those of you that I haven't met yet, hopefully this brings you some clarification and some conversation around what is going on with OSHA. Back in the summer, we did several sessions, I guess now, on pandemic safety officer and what that meant and how to manage COVID in the workplace. And over the last almost a year now, we have seen so much. My team and colleagues in the field of health and safety, of the creativity and the work that has gone in to keep our workers safe. And for a long time, it felt like, people that were getting it were in certain types of workplaces that were expected, right? Nursing homes, healthcare, where there was a lot of transmission. You would hear in manufacturing a little bit, but it was, oh, I went to Halloween, then it was Thanksgiving, and then it was the winter holidays. Now I definitely am seeing a lot more COVID in some of my regular clients' transmission in the workplace. So timely conversation with new administration, timely conversation as we're gearing up with so much in the world of COVID, and just anecdotally from my own experience with my clients and those that I've been working with in the last 11, 10 months on this, some reality that it is getting to work. So we have to talk about those things. So first of all, what to expect from OSHA in the next 4 years. New administration, just as Kevin said, a lot of executive orders. We're watching the news and they're in the double digits. I was, personally happy to see some executive orders addressing OSHA again. There was a lot of change in the last administration about, where OSHA sat. So we'll see some things that we saw in the Obama administration, but definitely a focus on COVID in the workplace, because as we all know, we want to keep people working. And we do that through health and safety standards and health and safety best practices and keeping our workers working. So I do have some guidance on what to expect. And, funny enough, Amy and I talked about doing this back in January. We set the date for today, Groundhog's Day. And sure enough, in the last couple of days, the executive order addressing COVID and addressing the role that OSHA will continue to play, but at a higher level, just came out. So timing is everything. And that's what I want to really focus in on today. So let's talk about OSHA and what we're really going to think and what we're really going to see. There were articles coming up and there was, an idea coming up to, January 20th. What can we expect? What would we expect? And it was, the idea was, we'll kind of go back to how it was under the Obama administration. But you can see now after the executive order on January 29th that the focus is on COVID in the workplace and really coming to the forefront of getting people at work and staying there. But overall, what we should expect to see will be a greater focus on worker rights and safety, and really focusing in on some relationships with large organizations, with unions, with different agencies, different government agencies to work together to really focus on those worker rights and safety. And that goes across the board from general industry, which is what I know most of you are under, but also we're seeing that in mining, agriculture, and construction and marine. So across all of the spectrums of OSHA, we do see an increased focus, or will see an increased focus on those rights and worker safety. I do think, and across the board, the idea is we will see a renewed focus on enforcement. Enforcement certainly took a back seat in the last administration, focused more on your high hazard industries. And then with COVID, certainly the enforcement took a further backseat because the inspectors weren't out in the field unless there were high hazard conditions, high hazard workplaces, based on data, based on complaints, and those types of things. I think what we will see going into the next 4 years is that renewed focus on enforcement and not just in terms of COVID, but in terms of all of the regulations surrounding general industry, construction, and so on, and really get back to some of those enforcement plans that they've had in the past, focused on things like amputation, focused on machine guarding. So we really want to inform everyone that you really need to be on the top of your game, not that you aren't already, but really being on the top of your game of all of your policies and procedures, because there will be that renewed focus on enforcement. The other thing that we're going to see already happening is the transparency in fines and citations. It has been standard for a very long time that you could go into the OSHA.gov website and you could see information on a company, maybe a company that was a competitor, your own company, anybody, ABC Manufacturing, and see what the fines and citations had been for that business over the years. And there has been less transparency in that over the last 4 years. And so that's something that we look to see again, where when the final citations are given, when the final fines are delivered, that information will be more available, will be made public, so that, employees, future employees, competitors, et cetera, will be able to see that information. I mentioned this already, but we will see greater coordination between agencies. So seeing already just with the executive order and some of the materials on the OSHA website, which is updating, by the day, you're seeing a lot of coordination between EPA, Department of Energy, and like I said, agriculture, general industry. So we may see more of that as OSHA takes on, the goals and the vision of the new administration. And I will say, and I highlighted this, but we see it in the COVID guidance, which I'll go into in a little bit, but I do see, and I'm certainly not alone in this, and there are a lot of articles and expectations for this, is a focus on multilingual communication. So for those of you that do have workers that speak other languages, making sure that whatever you're providing them, whether it is, training, toolbox talks, work instructions, signs in the workplace, making sure that everyone understands in the language that they understand what the safety practices are, so that they are informed, they understand, and they can work safely at the job that they're there to do. So whether that's Spanish, French, many Asian languages and dialects, finding a way, whether it's internal translation, whether it's working with a translation firm, and I know that the folks at MEA have helped me find translation firms, and there are many of them out there, making sure that you have communication that is multilingual, so your workers are informed of their rights, but are informed on how to work safely. So that's going to be a big focus of the Biden administration, and I think that will link right back to enforcement when you do have OSHA come in and take a look at your policies, procedures, and training. That may be a question that is asked to make sure that your employees do understand what the expectations are to work safely. So what's the update? So the big announcement, the big executive order that came out on January 29th was a couple things. Once it was a renewed focus on COVID compliance and COVID preparedness and safety in the workplace. Up until now, OSHA has been had given out a lot of great guidance, and you'll see that if you go on OSHA.gov. It's right there. There's a lot of documentation on how to stay safe in the workplace. We reviewed a lot of that in our pandemic safety officer training series back in the summertime. What OSHA was using in terms of a standard to protect workers in the workplace was what we affectionately call the general duty clause, right? The clause that tells us under the OSHA Act that workers, should be provided a healthy and safe workplace. So that's the catch-all, right? If your business isn't providing a safe and healthful workplace, then you can be cited against that general duty clause. What the number one thing that we're seeing that has been bolded and highlighted in the world of health and safety is by March 15th, OSHA needs to respond back to President Biden, telling him and his staff if they plan to institute an emergency safety standard. And that would last for 6 months. And that would be a specific standard dealing with COVID in the workplace. And that is something that would be enforceable other than the general duty clause. So I think we can expect to see that by March 15th. I think that will take out the gray area of what you should be doing and should not be doing when it comes to what you need for your pandemic preparedness plan to keep your workers safe. There will be that renewed enforcement effort, and most of it will most likely center around those employee complaints. The increase in employee complaints, I don't think, is a surprise to anyone in the world of manufacturing and industry. And whether it's, a company you know of, if it's anecdotal, over a Zoom call or chatting with a friend or a neighbor, there are certainly businesses that are doing a great job. They're really giving it their all. They're getting creative. They're figuring it out. They're taking care of their workers. And then, and I've seen this myself, there are businesses that, maybe had a lot of steam in the beginning and they're starting to loosen up. You may see businesses that are just not complying. And, that's the decision they're making. And with that, we are seeing these employee complaints, which will then dial back into enforcement efforts. So it's something to think about. We're 11 months in. We're going to hit the year. It's still with us. If you can, sit for a moment and think, what have we become lax on? What have we, taken a step back with? Let's get some renewed energy around keeping our workers at work and not letting that virus spread. There was also language in the executive order regarding protection for worker complaints. Now, certainly workers have protection, but the fact that it was in there, the fact that it's been mentioned, it's on the OSHA website, it means that there is a lot more oomph behind that. So we really want to make sure that we're, as always in health and safety, communicating with our workers, following up with our workers, making sure that when hazards, including COVID hazards, are brought to our attention, that we're addressing them in one way or another. And the first way to address them is through communication with our workers. So, that's where on the softer side of health and safety, we can avoid getting to written complaint if we really work with our employees and communicate with them what the safe practices should be, and then having some internal enforcement of those safe practices. And there continues to be, a lot of communication about COVID-19 as a recordable illness. And you'll see in the guidance from OSHA, the last update was in the June timeframe. So that may be something that gets a little bit more information around it as we move forward. And what we see in the OSHA website is really, the word reasonable comes up quite often. How in a reasonable way can you find out if this is spreading at work? And that's where in the last, let's say 6 weeks, since the winter holidays, since Thanksgiving, my firm, my colleagues, and my friends in the world of health and safety are getting more and more calls because it is getting much more obvious that, Erin came to work today. She didn't have symptoms, right? She passed all the obvious, and then 4 of the people she works with, they all have COVID. Now these 3 are showing symptoms. Everybody went for a test and they're all positive. I don't have COVID. I'm using myself as an example, but this just happened to a client of mine about 3 weeks ago. And now 5 of them are out and they had to shut the line down. So we really see that as a recordable incident, illness. Someone came into work and now 4 others are sick, and there's no denying it. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, that wasn't really happening as much. So we really have to think about going back to the basics of the pandemic safety plan and the things that we should be doing, and make sure that we're staying on top of it so we prevent that illness from happening in the workplace, becoming a recordable, and then becoming a workplace issue. So I've mentioned the pandemic safety plan, so I just wanted to put a little refresher. So for those of you that joined me in the summertime or saw a recording of this, these are the essentials, and this is what meets that guidance on workplace preparedness for COVID-19 and other pandemics that may come our way. Number one, the goal is to reduce workplace transmission. So how do we do that? We know social distancing, we know protective equipment, we know cleaning practices, but are we still up here with all of those things, or are we getting a little shaky on some of those things? So really thinking about how your workforce may be transmitting and really renewing that effort around that, making sure the protective equipment is there. You know, there has been so much on the news about face coverings, whether it's the cloth kind, the surgical mask, the N95, the N95, you know, so really making sure, number one, everyone has a face covering, and the face covering covers the nose and the mouth. And I know myself, I have seen a lot of this in some of my clients, in my grocery store, at the gas station, at Wawa, with the nose hanging out. And that is not properly protected. That's not protecting your workers. So that's something where you have conversations, communication, training, and discussions, because that's where the virus is moving from. Making sure that the social distance continues, especially as we see it getting into the workplace, the break rooms, the locker rooms, continuing with the Zoom meetings, as much as we're all so tired of this, keeping that momentum going to stay away from each other. Of course, the cleaning and disinfecting practices, and then of all the other side, the case management. So when someone reports symptoms, when someone reports a close contact, you know, managing your cases and sending people home. If people, you know, oh, it's just a sinus infection. Nope, you got to go home, right? Work from home, take the day. We don't want it to spread in work because we don't know that it's not COVID. And then finally, of course, your record keeping, and then keeping up with the education and communication with your workforce. Kind of can't say that enough. I know we hear and see so much, but we really have to continue to tell our employees the why. This is why we have partitions up. This is why we've staggered your breaks and your lunches. We know we all want to go back to normal, but we just can't until this is over. So your pandemic safety plan, the written plan that we talked about, really should continue to have these protocols in place. And also, most importantly, is that you're following them and continuing to implement them as the months go on. What we saw highlighted in terms of the safety plan updates that OSHA will be looking at, and there were a couple of things that were bolded and linked in OSHA's guidance that were posted just after the executive order, is number one, conduct a hazard assessment. So we know that hazard assessments in the world of health and safety are dictated when we have personal protective equipment hazard assessments. So I look at your job and I say, oh, you use these chemicals, maybe there's electrical, you know, maybe there's slip, trip, and fall issues. So I'm going to tell you, hey, you need safety glasses and a respirator and steel-toed shoes with good treads. What they want us to really look at is look at the different jobs, if we haven't done this already, and say, okay, employee A is on the line and they are, you know, 3.5 feet from the next person. So what do I need to do to prevent the hazard of COVID-19 from getting to one to the other? And if we haven't done this yet, right, that's the plexiglass, that's the shower curtain, it's the barrier, or it's the, you know, job rotation and moving people in and out of a work area. So we want to at least say, what the hazards are, and dictating from the hazard of COVID-19, where is the assessment? Where is the greatest risk in your workplace? Is it in manufacturing area because people are tight? Is it in your break rooms or in common shared areas? Is it in shipping and receiving? And really figure those things out as part of your pandemic safety plan. And then identifying from that your control measures. So again, the plexiglass, the job rotation, the cleaning schedules, make sure you have all of that written out in your safety plan. And then looking at some other, excuse me, adopting some policies. So you can see where, you know, 2 slides ago, I mentioned, you know, workplace or worker protection for complaints. OSHA is getting a lot of, or putting out there a lot of information in terms of, you know, not punishing workers who are possibly or potentially infected, you know, finding ways for people to work at home, having policies for absences. And I know Amy and her team can address all of those things with the great things that her team does. making sure, and I mentioned this already, that your coronavirus policies and procedures are communicated in both English and non-English speaking. So your workers need to understand, and finding a way to do that through translation really needs to happen and is essential. And then finally, those protections from retaliation for workers who raise coronavirus related concerns. And that could be on a couple sides, right? You're going to have workers who don't want to wear a face covering. We've talked about that in our pandemic safety classes. We've talked about workers that can't wear a face covering and how we accommodate them. Then you may have workers who are unhappy with that worker, right? So it goes in, that's where we move over to HR and I step away, but OSHA is reaching over a little bit into some of those practices, because remember, OSHA is under our Department of Labor. So you can see where certain things are meshing together. So those are some of the updates that we're seeing right on the OSHA page. They're giving a lot of guidance on that. And I think this is the types of things that you can expect to be pushed to the forefront in the next 6 months, especially if and when that emergency temporary standard, and remember that could go into effect as late as March 15th, becomes then the enforceable standard for worker protection for COVID-19 transmission at work. So with that, those are all of my updates. I will say, you know, COVID-19 is incredibly important in the workplace because we want to keep working, all of us do, but don't forget about your other health and safety protocols. So, you know, we've seen upticks in lack of chemical management when we have a lot of sanitizer, when we have a lot of cleaning products. So that's an important thing, to make sure you have safety data sheets, make sure you have the proper protective equipment for those that are cleaning surfaces, cleaning equipment, cleaning tools regularly, because we don't want to see injuries with that. So safety glasses, gloves, the whole bit. Looking at, you know, the continued, you know, top 5 issues with OSHA, you know, besides COVID, lockout, tagout continues to be an issue that is cited regularly by OSHA in the workplace. Also machine guarding, with an increase in enforcement under the Biden administration, you know, machine guarding has been at the forefront for the last several years because of the amount of amputations and serious injuries that we've seen in general industry and agriculture over the last decade. So thinking about your machine guarding, thinking about how you can prevent those types of injuries from machines that maybe the guarding isn't there, didn't come with it, or possibly the machinery is so old you don't have it. None of those are an excuse, no matter what. When you have machines, no matter the age, the type, they do have to have guards to protect your employees from those types of injuries. Also hazard communication, I just mentioned it, with safety data sheets, with good labeling, always in the top, you know, 3 or 4, because, you know, we get lackadaisical about that kind of stuff. And then, you know, remembering as we are in the winter season, I can't help myself, but slips, trips, and falls are the #2 cause of injury in the workplace. #1 is vehicle crash. So a lot of that is going down with so many of us staying home, but, you know, slips, trips, and falls, that leads to a lot of injuries 12 months out of the year, but certainly this type of weather and people itching to get back into work and commute in, this is where we see those injuries, and they can be very serious, with sprains, strains, which are long-term injuries, breaks, head injuries. So, you know, do your part to stay compliant, to watch out for your workers, and then of course to, you know, keep up to date on what's going on with COVID-19 in the workplace. So Amy, do we have some questions, or Kevin, do we have some questions?
Yeah, there's 2 questions. But before we do that, I just want to mention, Aaron brought up that for MEA members, we do have a safety plan available for members, but we also did PSO training last summer, and I think we had about 175 people go through it over a couple sessions. We've discussed whether we ought to do it again. So I'm just going to ask a little, you know, if anyone on the call would be interested in that class, either you didn't have it before or you'd like to go through it again. If you just kind of jot a note into the chat, we'll kind of, you know, if we get enough people that say they're interested, we'll look to schedule another one if Aaron would do it. But yeah, just again, I think this is such an important area that I'm just curious if some of you are interested. Someone asked how you get a copy of the safety plan. If you are a member, it's on the member tool site. If you can't find it there, just give a call to the hotline and we can gladly find it for you. 2 questions that came in. Aaron, one said, if you mentioned that COVID-19 is recordable, is that on an OSHA 300 form?
Yes, that's exactly it. So that's the point of stress that everyone is feeling. I know it's always that, oh, does it have to go on the form? And yes, so if you do have, and like I said, one client of mine, just 3 weeks ago, we did put those injuries on the OSHA 300 form for 2021. They are now considered workplace illnesses. So that's why, right? We want to prevent those, because then that goes into workers' compensation. So whatever we can do to keep that from happening, we want to make sure that we do it. So yeah, that's a good question, and that's a yes.
Okay, and maybe you mentioned the 2021 form. Maybe Aaron, if you send that to us, we'll send it out to all the participants so they have the latest form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then another question, let me read it because I'm not sure. Conflicting guidance regarding the need to wear masks if working in a cubicle or a workspace enclosed by shields. Do you have any, you or Amy have any clarification on that? I'm not sure what shields means, but anyone have any thoughts?
Like plexiglass type shield. So yeah, I can definitely take a jump at this one. We're seeing this everywhere. You know, you go into the office and everyone's behind their cube and they pull their mask down, or they go into their own private office. You know, that's where OSHA is saying you need a hazard assessment. So if you're in your own private office, I definitely have seen clients, you know, they put on the front of their door, say, you know, I'm not wearing a mask, please knock first, right? If you're in an office. And I think that that's appropriate. When you're in an open cubicle, I think that's where the hazard assessment comes in. Is it one person all by themselves? Are there people that are less than 6 feet from each other? You know, I think that's where we have to get the tape measure out. We have to think about our ventilation in the workspace. We have to think about you know, are you managing when coming in, people having signs and symptoms? So I don't think it's, and unfortunately, it's not a yes or no. It's very much looking at your workplace and definitely looking at it now in a harder way, because we see the transmission at work happening, to say what is appropriate and what is not. And maybe we have to move people a little bit further from each other, have some policies when anytime you get up and move around, you have to have your face covering on. So it really comes down to what kind of controls do you have? Is the ventilation good? How many people are in the area? And having those procedures for when you do move around in the workplace.
And I know we got to turn it over, and we might have to get some of these with Amy, but 2 questions. If somebody contracts COVID outside the workplace and nobody gets it within the work, does not transmit internally, is that still reportable?
No. No.
So.
Right.
All right. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. I haven't looked at them all, but it looks like a lot of people are buzzing with the class, so maybe we'll get that set with you again. All right. With that,
Aaron, that was great. Thank you, Kevin. Aaron, I'm going to actually ask you one more question, because this has come up a ton. So if you would address this question, because I haven't had great answers for our members. We talk about the competing needs for safety. So let's say you have a manufacturing situation and employees are required to wear safety glasses, and then they put on a mask and the safety glasses start to fog up. Do you have a good answer to that? What to do?
I'm basically asked every time I walk into a shop as I'm standing there with my safety glasses fogging up. So I totally get it. Now I don't do that 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So my heart goes out to people. But here's what the stance is. It's all about risk. So if you're a forklift driver and you're going to go outside, this is a true story. Many times I've answered this in the last 10 months. And you leave the area because you're going to go load something on whatever you're doing. And you drive out to an area, you're all alone, but you can't see. So my answer back is, well, what is the greater hazard at that point? That greater hazard is that you can't see and you're going to hit someone and possibly kill them. So take the mask down and keep your safety glasses on, because there are hazards of the road, and continue on. On the other side, we have to look at, you know, I'm doing some, you know, grinding work. I'm in a machine shop and I'm doing some very close work. I need to be able to see it. I need to protect my eyes. I'm getting fogged up. You stop what you're doing, take a look around there. If there's no one within 6 feet, take your mask off, continue your work. So you really have to read the risk at the time of the need to remove your face covering. What I think is very important is when you have supervisors and managers not allowing that to go too far. And that's where that gray area of enforcement and communication comes in, is, you know, read the hazard, what's the risk, is anybody around you? If not, do your work, make sure your eyes are protected, your face is protected, those types of things, and then put the mask back on. You can always add a face shield. Face shields are not ideal at all for COVID. I know we see them out there for people that have compromising issues like asthma or other lung or heart issues that cannot and are medically cleared not to wear a face covering. But you can always add a face shield if you'd like to kind of help with that. But I would say, I would just watch that gray area and make sure that you're enforcing properly, because, you know, you give an inch and then everybody's taking their safety glasses off because they're fogged up and they're hot. And some of that we can't allow, especially if they're within 6 feet of each other.
Yep. And I'm seeing some people are chatting in some suggestions around anti-fog sprays and wipes.
Totally.
Which I've heard, you know, mixed success on from our members.
Yeah.
And then some people saying if you pinch the nose better on your mask, you might help. So there are some ways to do that, but I think that might be the biggest safety question I've gotten, the mix between regular safety and COVID safety. So,
Yeah.
So that is awesome. Thank you so much. And we're getting a lot of call for more PSO training in the chat. So maybe we'll be seeing you again real soon.
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay, great.